God we will follow.
Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I am Ken Coughlin. Thank you very much for joining us here in our first episode of September. And to kick off our new season, we brought back a familiar person here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you. It's not people wonder, what do you mean New Year?
We'll get to that in a second.
It's a mystery. Hey, tell people who maybe haven't, they haven't seen you before, then they're not, this is like the first episode they've ever watched because you've been on quite a bit. But tell people who you are.
I've been through the drill a few times. I'm Greg Derwart and been a member of Trinity going on 9 years now.
So this is kind of neat because this is kind of the Greg and Ken week. Because
That's right.
If you're watching us here today on Trinity Talk Live, we invite you to come back again tomorrow and watch us on In the World. Greg and I are going to be hosting our current events program tomorrow at noon as well. So
I'll wear the same shirt tomorrow.
Sounds like a plan. Do your laundry tonight, and then we'll wash it up, so that'll be fine.
Very good.
Anyway, so this is kind of neat. We're actually going to be covering a topic today that I'm going to let Greg in a minute tell you what it is, because it's something he and I have talked about in the past, and I'm going to boost his ego a little bit. This is something that really impresses me about you and as a person and the way you structure your life that I think is extremely valuable. And we started talking about, hey, maybe we should do a Trinity Talk Live episode about that. And I think that's a fantastic idea because this is something I think you need to share because so many people I think could benefit from it. So after telling you what a wonderful person you are, why don't you tell people what we're talking about today?
Well, let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever used a GPS or device mapping device?
Absolutely.
Okay. And, you're too young to remember the old ADC maps and the actual maps that would fold up. And
I appreciate you thinking that.
You could never get them folded back up.
Not true at all.
Perfectly.
Use them quite regularly.
And, you'd put them in the glove box. So if you've ever utilized any of those types of devices, then you have utilized a goal planning device because a map is the same thing as coming up with a strategic plan for your life. So I'm going to map us through the process for beginning with eternity in mind, because when we think about mapping out our lives and strategic planning for ourselves, it should all be under the umbrella of giving glory to God and doing His work, being His hands and feet here on this world.
Let me ask you a preliminary question before you dive in.
Okay.
I didn't tell you this was coming. This is fun. But you've talked about this before. I want to kind of give people a little insight. What is it that led you to come up with this in the first place?
Well, it's evolved over many years, if not decades. And I have utilized resources and suggestions and ideas from friends and colleagues and books and references that I'll point to as we go through this process. But it's definitely been, I've always been the type of person that needs organization. Mm-hmm. So I'm naturally drawn to having a list of things to do or just feeling organized about my day and my life. And Stephen Covey talks about beginning with the end in mind, and that's when you think about beginning with eternity in mind. Let's look at the end game and then have stepping stones that can drill down to what you do on a daily basis.
Excellent. Well, why don't you dive in? Tell us a little bit about what we're doing.
Sounds good. So if we start on the first slide here, we can look at the major concepts that we're going to run through. We're going to start with these big picture items that would be identifying your values, the different roles you play in your life, coming up with a mission or a purpose, even coming up with a word that defines your life. And then we'll drill down into long-term, mid-range, and short-term goals. We'll get into the time periods for those, and then how that can even drill down to weekly and daily tasks and a daily routine.
Okay.
Sound like a plan?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so let's start with the big picture stuff. Values. So when you think about having a drive or a desire about what you do, if you come up with a plan that conflicts with your governing values, you're never going to accomplish those goals. So it's good to just clarify and even come up with a list of what your personal values are. And so, these are the things that are important to you, the way you want to live your life, and just centers around your moral compass. So, I have values that speak to service, wanting to be successful, appreciating beauty, being a responsible person, being a leader in the community, those types of things. So, whatever you feel defines you as a person, what's important to you.
This is your framework. This is what's going to establish the framework for everything else that comes below it.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And then once you do that, another thing that you can do at the same time is clarifying what your personal roles are in your life. Okay. You're a Christian. You're a husband or a wife. You're a father or a mother. You're a child. You're a parent. You're a colleague. You're a friend. And just coming up with clarifying statements for each of these types of roles that are important to you. So when you have your list of values and your list of roles that you play, then you can use those things to come up with what your personal mission could be. Okay, and if any of you that are in the business world, about corporate mission statements. Basically defines your purpose as an organization. So your personal mission statement just defines who you are as a person and why you're here. And this is sort of what over the years I had gone through this process before I took things to a higher level with my spiritual life. So I had gone through this process for many years. But as I grew in my faith, I also added this umbrella of what is God's purpose for us. Looking at books like The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren, and just being in prayer and in the Word will help you come up with your mission. Another resource that I've used for many years, it's a secular book, but it's called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And there's some spiritual references in the book, but don't just go in knowing that it's not necessarily a Christian-based book. Right. But it's interesting because it was written in, I think it came out in 1937, and it makes reference to coming through the Great Depression and overcoming, any type of odds and stuff like that. And Napoleon Hill wrote this book in collaboration with Andrew Carnegie, and he spent 20 years introducing Napoleon to his influential friends, whether it was Henry Ford or Thomas Edison, presidents, and just interviewed them on what they did to be successful in life. And he came up with these 13 principles, and it's a nice framework from a strategic standpoint.
What I like about this so far as we're going through is a lot of these things are things that people, like you talk about the roles that people fill. Everybody knows that they have these roles, but they probably never sat down and actually thought about it in this type of strategic framework before.
Right.
And if you just take the time to kind of organize in your mind these things that you already know, then you realize that you have the tools to help you develop from that
exactly
the next steps, the following steps.
And these books and other references make it clear that the best way to accomplish your goals, number one, is to, write them down, read them read them out loud, and reference them on a regular basis.
Right. Keep coming back to them.
Exactly.
Right? So
keep them front of mind. So, coming up with a word. So there's another resource that's more recent. It's a book called Your Life Word, and it's written by three different guys: Dan Britton, Jimmy Page, and John Gordon. I first heard about this book a few years ago because Jimmy Page is active with. He's part of the leadership of Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Right.
And learned about through that. But basically, not unlike your mission statement, coming up with a singular word that defines who your life, and your purpose, and it helps you, keep that front of mind and stay focused. So that's something that has been valuable for me as well. So once you come up with that overarching strategy, then we start drilling down into some more specifics.
Right.
Okay, so coming up with long-term goals, and when I talk about long-term goals, I'm talking about at least 5, maybe 10 years plus in the future. Okay, because if your strategy and your purpose is how you're going to be the Lord's hands and feet and accomplishing God's will for in your life, begin with that end game and then step back from there.
Let me interject for a second. I want to give an example. Like here at Trinity, we have a mission statement, connecting with God, connecting with others. So
Exactly.
if that's what our goal is, what our mission statement is,
Yep.
then the next step is we're going to be, okay, now we want to, with that mission statement in mind, or the word in mind, like you
Yes.
just said, if you can boil it
Yes.
down to word, you keep that in mind when you're trying to now to start thinking, starting with long term, where we want to be in conjunction with that statement.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So you're still staying focused.
So you can still you could use this same strategy for the goals of our church,
Right.
the goals of your small business. It fits in many instances. So for long-term goals, look 10 years out in the future. And then what I do is I also break this down into several categories of my life. So I come up with long-term goals for my faith life, my family, my career, wealth and finances, knowledge and continuous education, health, and then friends and community. Okay,
Right.
and you don't have to use those categories. That just happens to be the categories that are important to me, and that I've chosen to, come up with specific goals for those categories. And then what I've done is created a vision statement for each of those 7 categories. So, a mission statement is your purpose. A vision statement is sort of more aspirational and like the perfect scenario of, once you accomplish that goal, this is how things look once you've accomplished
Where
that
you'll
goal.
be or
Yeah. And that becomes important later on when we drill down into what you do on a daily basis, from an affirmation and visioning standpoint, reminding you of what you're heading towards. Some resources that I've used for this category is an audio recording that was probably done, in the 1960s by Earl Nightingale. It's called The Strangest Secret, and the secret is basically the law of attraction, or you think what you become what you think about.
Right.
So if you want to lose 10 pounds, then you say to yourself, I've lost 10 pounds, or I already am the weight that I want to be. And the subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between reality and fantasy. And so it's just keeping yourself in the right frame of mind. Feed that positive energy and those positive thoughts as opposed to negative thoughts.
Negative thoughts, right.
Yeah. I made reference to Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's another a great resource. And then a suggestion in terms of all these goals is to make them SMART goals. And that's an acronym for being specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound.
Oh, I see that now.
Okay? So once you've done those long-term goals, 5, 10, 15 years out in the future, then come up with some mid-range goals, and those are meant to be 3 to 5 years out in the future, and the sole purpose of those mid-range goals are to be a stepping stone to accomplish the long-range goals.
And maybe the answer to this question is tied into that, the fact that you're going from long to mid to short. But one of the things you mentioned in making these goals SMART is making them attainable.
Yes.
And I find that can be an issue for a lot of people where we have pie-in-the-sky aspirations where
Absolutely.
maybe we're not, if we're honest with ourselves, maybe those goals aren't really attainable.
Absolutely.
So what would you say to somebody as far as helping to make sure that the goals they're setting are attainable goals?
Well, let's see. So starting with the long range is part of that strategy. Thinking about the big picture stuff first, and that way, the best way to make them attainable is to make them baby steps. Okay, so you're not biting everything off at once. So you can be more aspirational with the long-term goals as long as they get more specific into the mid-range and short-term. You
Right.
definitely want to make sure your mid-range and short-term goals are attainable.
So when you break it down, once you get to the short term, if you realize, okay, that short term maybe that's not as attainable. Maybe I need to go back up the ladder. And
There you go.
adjust.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
These smart goals, overlap. So one way to make them attainable is to also be very specific and measurable.
Got it.
It's one thing to say, I want to lose weight. But if I want to say, I want to lose 10 pounds by the end of this calendar year, then you can break that down into monthly goals, and it just drills down to what you do on a weekly and daily basis.
And that helps you I think it helps you keep going a little bit more too, because you're seeing progress being made.
Exactly.
You don't expect to lose 10 pounds by next week. You
Right.
know, and as long as you're taking those baby steps and accomplishing those baby steps, it helps keep going.
Absolutely. So then, obviously drilling down to short-term goals, I call my short-term goals the 12-month goals. So whether you start here in September and come up with a 12-month period over your school year, or start by looking at these strategic things and reading some of these books over the next couple of months and go through the process of coming up with 12-month goals around Christmas time, so that they're calendar goals for 2020, whatever works best for you.
Hence your opening by saying Happy New Year.
Exactly. And I say that because, we just had a very successful kickoff weekend. Kids are back in school. College football is, in gear. I had a boss that would say that he always felt that September 1st felt like New Year's Day.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of ways, we've gone through the summer vacation season and we're ready to get back into action.
It's kind of the kickoff of, you've used kickoff because it's what you just do, the kickoff weekend, but it is kind of the kickoff of our life cycle. It almost seems like the way we're, at least here in America, that things are structured.
Yeah.
So
there's nothing wrong with that. And then, so I had mentioned the life word earlier. They also have another book called One Word, written by the same guys, and it's going through that process of coming up with one word that will define you for the coming year. And I mention that now because that can tie into whatever your short-term goals are, and whatever's going on that you're really trying to tackle over the next 12 months, you could tie in a word that defined you for the coming year.
Got it.
Okay. We can drill down more, Ken. Can you believe it? We can keep going, okay? All right. So now we need to look at how this drills down into weekly and daily tasks. So a couple more references that can be helpful for you. A book that I just read this year called Miracle Morning, written by a guy named Hal Elrod. And he has come up with a wonderful routine on how to tee things up for success for the day. And he uses another acronym called SAVERS. And so he incorporates things including silence, affirmations, visioning, exercise, reading, and scribing. And so within the context of silence, I also incorporate prayer and devotion into that part of the morning. Affirmations and visioning, that ties into the vision statements.
Right.
So those 7 vision statements that I've created for those 7 goal categories, I just read through them as a part of my visioning. Affirmations, you can. The girls bought me for Christmas one year a book filled with confidence quotes. Just read that, just to tee myself up.
Always keeping you moving.
Positive thoughts for the day. Exercise, whatever you're doing for exercise, in consultation with your doctor, just make sure you're doing something, whether it's stretching or whatever you're doing. Reading, keeping the saw sharp. It can be pleasure reading or something that has to do with professional education. Always make sure that you're reading or doing audiobooks around something. And then here's something I admit I have not started doing yet, but a lot of people attest to it, is scribing or journaling or having a diary, and that can help keep you focused on your goals. And then also it's a way to hold yourself accountable if you don't have someone else as an accountability partner, which I would recommend for all these goals as well. You can just be transparent and honest with yourself. This is what went well today. I hit a home run, knocking these things off my list. Or I'm struggling. And as long as you're being transparent about that, and you're not sweeping that under the rug, that can be helpful as well.
Right.
Another thing from an affirmation standpoint, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, that's another classic as well. So that ties it all together right there.
Values, roles, mission. I love the inverted pyramid that we've got here. So, I mean, it strikes me as lots of times when people, I'm going to use an example that, it was probably about 10 years ago or so now. I actually did enroll in some seminary classes and at another seminary, and I was doing some Christian apologetics classwork, but I hadn't really done anything like this. I hadn't organized and figured out what my long-term goals were. It was just kind of like, just kind of doing it on a whim. And and it's funny when I did that, guess what happened? Didn't end up following through. There were certain things that I came to realize as I was going through that program that I really needed to have in place before I started, and I didn't.
Sure.
And because I just hadn't planned it out ahead of time.
Yeah.
And so even something like, attending seminary classes kind of fell by the wayside, even though it kind of got started.
Right.
And now here we are, 10 years later, and, you organize it, did much more this way, organizing it out, planning out long term, where do I want to be?
Yeah.
And now, of course, it's being more successful to the point where I'm actually having conversations with the people at my current seminary where I'm getting a master's in Christian apologetics about going on to the PhD level after that. Well, again, if that's going to be my long-term goal, I've had to think that through. Okay, well, what's that going to, if this is where I want to be, where do I need to be at mid-range? Where do I need to be, short-term? And even now, I'm like 2 years out from finishing my master's. Well, if I want to go on and get a PhD, there's two options at the end of the master's program. You can either do basically, there's two kind of culmination ways you can wrap up the program, either with a thesis or with some other type of experience. Well, most people kind of go the more practical route, but if you want to get a PhD, you have to go the thesis route. And so that's kind of thing where if I just went through and I didn't plan this all out, then I might be putting myself in a difficult position where if I didn't do what I needed to do in order to move on to the next step. Yeah. So that's what I really like about this whole process.
Great.
Any closing thoughts you want to talk about on it?
Well, just you painted a great picture in terms of looking at the big picture and from a strategic standpoint. The only thing to be mindful of is how it drills down to what you do on a daily basis.
Right.
You know the best way to eat an elephant, don't you?
One bit at a time.
One bite at a time. Okay. So I think that's the thing that makes this process work so well is if you solely just thought about the big picture stuff, it can be very overwhelming.
Yes.
But when you drill it down to things that you can do on a daily and weekly basis, it just makes it that much more manageable, and you see those little wins every day.
This is really valuable. Thank you, Greg.
And then the only other thing that I'll mention is we mentioned accountability partners. If anyone wants to go through this journey and needs an accountability partner, reach out to me. I'm happy to walk anyone through this process.
You want me to put your contact information on the screen? All right. I don't know what contact information he's going to give me, but whatever it is, it's on the screen right now. So, all right. Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That was really valuable. I hope you all found it valuable too. Hey, if you did like this video, do me a favor. Go ahead and click the like button. That's a thumbs up button right here on the YouTube page. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to date on this program and a lot of other programs we've got, like In the World, coming up tomorrow at noon with Greg and I. And also share this video in particular. There's nobody in the world, whether it be just your personal friends trying to organize their life, or as Greg mentioned, it's going to apply to churches, to businesses. There's nobody out there that can't benefit from this program, this outline that he just walked through with you. So please, please, please share it to other people and let them know about it so that we can get the word out as broadly as possible. We're going to be back again in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we are going to be talking about the North American Lutheran Church. That is the denomination to which Trinity belongs. And we're going to have a couple people on the show that, along with me, we all went to the National Convocation over the summer. And we're going to talk a little bit about not just the North American Lutheran Church in general, but what it means to be part of that denomination, a part of a denomination, and why we are a part of a denomination. Because I'm sure there are people, obviously there's people from Trinity here watching this program who, I don't even know if you knew we were part of the North American Lutheran Church. We've been pushing that, so hopefully you did. So we're going to explain that to you so you understand why we are and what that means. But I know there are a lot of Christians, and maybe some even watching this show, that are from outside of our Trinity family who there's a lot of non-denominational churches. So it's going to hopefully be a really good informative conversation about why we here at Trinity anyway have chosen to be part of a denomination, this denomination in particular. So thank you again, Greg.
My pleasure.
And we will, I think we're going to wrap this one up, but I will see you tomorrow, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you very much. God bless.
In your word we will follow.